Hi everybody, it's 314 React here, and today we're looking at Forza Horizon 5 with the brand new patch that adds in extra resolution scaling and anti-aliasing options. So now there's the ability to put on AMD FSR2, DLSS, and DLAA. So we're going to be looking at some of these. We're also going to be looking at the new ray tracing settings, which now allow you to go from not only high, but all the way up to ultra and extreme. And they also add self-reflections to the cars. There's not full reflections on the cars using ray tracing, but there are self-reflections. So we're going to take a little bit of a look at that. So let's dive right in. Alrighty, so let's make sure the graphics settings are on what they were before the patch, which is where I had MSAA on at 8 times, and the ray tracing was at high. And we're getting about 70 frames a second there. So if we do a bit of driving around, yeah, it sits about 60 to 70. And it's only when you go through and create some particle effects and some smoke effects and stuff that you'll see it drop to below 60, and also when it's raining as well I've seen it drop below 60. So MSAA is pretty heavy on the settings, but it does look really nice. We'll have a comparison later between the different resolution scaling settings and how they impact performance, but of course the main thing we want to be looking at is the ray tracing. So park up here and we go into photo mode. We can see that there is self-reflections there. You can see the underside of the wing. Now, the reflections around the outside here will remain the same, even if you turn ray tracing completely off, because I think they're using a mixture of dynamic cube maps and screen space reflections. So the main thing is the self-reflections, such as the underside of the spoiler and the mirrors here, as well as more finer details around these areas with the car reflecting off of itself. Let's clean the car up. I think the reason for them doing that is to keep it nice and optimized. Because obviously you don't want a game like this running anywhere below 60 FPS really. So if I now switch ray tracing completely off from the high setting, these reflections should disappear. And you can see the underside of the spoiler is no longer reflecting. There's just a basic shadow there. There's no longer reflections of the wing mirrors there. And with cars with more chrome wheels, you can see reflections of the car in there as well, but that's also missing. But the overall reflections on the car, like the background there, look basically the same. So let's crank that ray tracing back on, and there you go. Now we see the difference between the ray tracing completely off and what the new patch has added in terms of ray tracing in game. I think this sort of ray tracing was available before, but only in the garage and in replays, I believe, whereas now it's available in the open world and in races. So let's take this ray tracing and crank it up to the new extreme mode. So it looks like a bit more detail there. In fact, what it looks like is that there's a bit more perspective correct ray tracing going on there, I think, which is really interesting, but it is still limited to self-reflections on the car itself. Yeah, that reflection looks the same of that tree over there, basically the same quality, but now the car's able to reflect on itself in a really nice and accurate way, accurately reflecting in the windows there, over the curvature of the car. So the ray tracing setting isn't the biggest thing, it's more of a subtle detail of the car, but it's still a nice to have. I don't think they're going to implement full ray tracing reflections in a racing game just yet, until they can make sure that you can get really high frame rates out of it. Let's just go back to the old high mode and see what the difference in that spoiler is. Yeah, it just seems the reflection's a little less dynamic with the lower settings. Interesting, very interesting. And also the FPS impact is minimal. It's like 2 to 5 FPS between those two settings. So if you've got the power, you may as well turn it on. Of course, this is running on an RTX 4090 with a Ryzen 7700X. But I imagine anything above a 3060 is going to be able to handle this pretty well. So the ray tracing is a cool little addition there, but the real new attraction of the patch is going to be the brand new scaling and anti-aliasing settings. So let's take a look at those now in game, and we will also do an ICAT comparison of some screenshots later on, as well as a benchmark comparing a couple of the settings just to see what the performance is like. So as mentioned, we are here in MSAA, and it's pretty much what you expect from 8x MSAA. Quite a clean image. I also have the old school sort of gamma and transparency AA on as well, so that should be handling transparent objects. Although I imagine the majority of this game world is 3D, with the exception of probably imposters in the distance for trees and stuff like that. So basically 2D trees. So the image is pretty smooth. There's no temporal artifacts or anything like that going on, but it is quite heavy on the GPU. Let's flick over to FSR 2.2. So massive jump in the frame rate, over twice the FPS. Bit more blurry looking, but not too many visual artifacts in movement as far as I can see. Whoa! It's just a little bit of loss in detail in the distance, but for the most part it looks good. There's also a bit more stifling on the car there, on the details of the car paint. Let's have a quick look in first person mode. Yeah, it looks pretty good. It's dealing with all the movement of the shrubbery pretty well. Let's flick over to temporal anti-aliasing. So TAA looks good when static for the most part, and there's not too much blur. And we've got a decent frame rate, very close to what FSR was giving us. Let's get a bit more movement on the screen. So in an area like this, where you've got these trees moving around, TAA can sometimes give you some blur on that, but it doesn't look too blurry. The sharpness can be adjusted. Nice frame rate. Distant details look alright. Again, this is 4K, so it may differ on lower resolutions. And movement looks fine. Not too blurry. Not too horrible. You can tell there's a bit of blur, a bit of lack of detail, but nothing too bad at all. So let's flick over to DLSS quality mode. So immediately the sharpness goes up. Even higher frame rate. A lot of detail there. Let's keep that speed up. Let's go to first person mode. Some odd sampling of those power lines up there, but I think it's because they're so small, we're just going to get that anyway. Again, no real blur. Nothing strange going on. Nothing obvious in motion blur or distracting. So it doesn't appear to be anything weird with the reconstruction there that's immediately noticeable. And then if we go over to DLAA, lovely extra bit of detail there, because obviously deep learning anti-aliasing is just applying the anti-aliasing side of the deep learning algorithm. It's not having to do any upscaling from a lower resolution. So the benefit there is you're getting more detail to work from, and we'll probably see more of that when we look at the ICAT screenshots. And we are getting over 100 FPS. The other advantage of DLAA on its own is that because we're not rendering internal resolution, anything tied to the resolution, like some shading algorithms and ray tracing, won't be restricted. So you're going to get better reflections, because even if you're running 4K with DLSS 2, you're still getting those lower res reflections, because the internal resolution is being rendered lower, therefore a lower amount of rays. This is pretty flawless. Again, really, really nice performance. No stuttering, nothing weird going on. No visual artifacting as far as I can see. And even through areas like this, there's not really much visual artifacting going on. Nothing strange. No blur in those trees. The anti-aliasing on those power lines could be a bit better, but I think that's probably going to be difficult to get that right. Now, I'm not going to show FXAA or Fidelity FX CAS because they don't look so good, but we will have another look at MSAA 8 times and see how it cleans up those power lines. So let's do that. It looks like you're actually losing some of the geometry of the power lines because they're too small, but they do look a little less aliased. So a little less detail, but a little smoother. Same for the details in the background there as well, like that cornfield and stuff like that. We'll see more of that when we look at the ICAT comparison. So, for me, I think the two best approaches are probably MSAA AX or DLAA. So just while we're in MSAA AX here, let's quickly look at the car and the details on the car. How much banding is going on with the details of the paint there. And then we'll go back over to DLAA. Way sharper. There's a bit more banding though, I think. Probably just because there's just more detail and the subpixel density is getting a bit too high. DLAA is probably the best way to go. But then all the settings seem pretty great to me. If you just want a good frame rate, then pretty much anything, you know, FSR, DLAA, DLSS. If you haven't got an NVIDIA card, FSR 2.2 will work just fine and still look really good. I don't think it'll be that noticeable to most people, so it's good that you've got all these options. The only thing they need to add is XESS, Intel's solution, and see how that runs and looks. Seeing DLAA on its own, which I've not really seen before, makes me think they should add a DLAA only option to every single game that also supports DLSS, because if you're using deep learning super sampling, you're also using DLAA, so they should just let you use DLAA on its own so that you can bypass, like I said, all the previously mentioned restrictions of using DLSS and just get that full native rendered image but with all the lovely anti-aliasing on it. So let's go over to those benchmarks now, which is going to be DLAA versus MSAA 8X.
Press R to rewind.
So we can see here MSA 8 times, CPU simulation 243, so it looks like we're GPU limited definitely. CPU render, GPU, that's the one we're really interested in. So 62 is the average, 54 is the minimum, 72 is the maximum. So ideally these days for these sort of games you want to be running at 60 minimum, and in the range sections there, that's where you saw it go down to 54.4, which is where I don't think it'd be critical if you're just casually playing, but if you were playing a bit more in a professional setting, going down to 54 FPS could be the difference between winning and losing. It did look very good, but now we're going to restart. I'm going to test with DLAA, and we're going to see how it compares.
press R to rewind.
Alrighty, so big difference there already. You can see FPS average is 95, minimum is 82, and the maximum is 106. So yeah, the minimum is the really important one there. That's a minimum of 54.4 to a minimum of 82.3. We're getting all the benefit of the details of 4K, but with that extra anti-aliasing of DLAA and keeping a nice high frame rate. Now we're going to go over to some ICAT to compare the different versions of upscaling and anti-aliasing with a static image. Alrighty, here we are with good old ICAT. Let's go for MSAA and then DLAA the other side. So MSAA on the left and DLAA on the right. And already what we can see here is that sharpening of detail that I mentioned. So you can see that it's captured. DLAA has captured a lot more of that detail in like the carbon fiber there. A hell of a lot sharper, but without being too sharp. It's just a bit more of a blurry mess with MSAA there. But you can see what I mean about it being a bit smoother with MSAA, but it's a bit of a loss of detail. Just looks a slightly bit more crunchier with DLAA, especially this bit here. So you got soft bits up there, nice pixel filling in there, and then with DLAA, not so much. A bit more crunchy because it's anti-aliasing it, but it's giving you a lot more detail there. So it would almost come down to personal preference there, whether you want it more smoother with less detail, or a little more crunchier but with a bit more detail. And from a distance, it doesn't look too much like the DLAA is, much more crunchier. It still looks really nicely anti-aliased, especially in those distant bits, like the cornfield up here. Like the amount of extra detail there. MSA only does it alongside the edge of polygons. So I'm wondering if distant trees like this aren't being turned into like imposters in the game, and that's why you're getting this weird sort of effect. Or if they are 3D, this sort of missing detail in between the trees is because it's sampling, and it's getting mostly a blue. So it looks kind of see-through, whereas this DLAA is more intelligently reconstructing the image or constructing the anti-aliasing around the image in a more intelligent way so that you get less of this sort of fake looking pattern of a see-through tree and a bit more detail. I imagine DLAA has a lot more intelligence to it when it comes to distance of the image as well. Like it has a bit more of an understanding of what a tree should look like at that distance, or the details of the tree. That's why you're getting this much better look. To the right, let's crank on DLSS 2 quality mode. Oh, look at the difference there. That's where you can see the image reconstruction coming in. Because obviously it's rendering internally at quad HD, something like that when it's at 4K, and then it's reconstructing that image, then applying the AA. Yeah, you can see that difference there. DLSS. Even DLSS, though, still maintains more detail in the distance and more detail overall than MSAA, and even reconstructs the carbon fiber look on the car even more as well. Even the text there, look at that, like V12, clearly much more readable there. With MSAA, it's just all kind of blurred together, again, because of the way it's sampling. It's really, really interesting. That even rendering internally at lower resolution, reconstructing it up using ML gives you better detail than 4K with MSAA. That just shows how far technology has come. Even the shadowing looks a bit better. Although, let's check out that shadowing with DLAA. Yeah. Wow. That is fascinating. So what we can do next is we can have FSR 2.2 quality on the left and DLAA on the right. Let's get a nice zoom in. Ooh, yeah. Ouch. Yeah. Look at that. That's where you really see the difference, because I think FSR 2.2 quality will be rendering internally at the same resolution as DLSS 2.2, but it's not using ML to reconstruct the image, so you're getting huge image quality loss. Immense loss of quality, especially on the text there. Oof. I mean, it still looks good from afar, but you can definitely see that major lack of detail. Especially these distant areas. Let's go up against DLSS 2 quality. Yep, again, that machine learning image reconstruction algorithm just absolutely, completely pummels it into the ground. I mean, look at that pattern on the carbon fiber there. It's almost like it's flat 2D in some sort of screen space or something. And again, the text. FSR's good, but still has a lot of work. Again, it'd be really interesting to see how XESS compares. Let's crank TAA on the left. Yeah, look, it's where it really, that details suffer in the really close-up stuff, like the carbon fiber details here. That's where it really suffers, big time. Well, it seems to handle the text maybe a little better. I also took screenshots of FXAA and other things, but I don't think... Yeah, it's just going to be very blurry. Good old FXAA. So I think the two actually best competing ones, when we're looking at it in this detail, will obviously be DLSS 2 versus DLAA. I think that's the ultimate comparison. You're just getting so much more detail. Well, they are quite close though, especially areas like this. I mean, some of that looks identical. There's a slight sort of greyish colour to the DLSS 2 here, compared to here where it's a bit more yellowy. You've got the slight reflection here, which should be ray traced. Yeah, I think you can see a bit of detail there just being lost. Oh, and the details on the carbon fiber as well. Yeah, overall, there seems to be a sort of, I don't know if it's like the weather changed a bit between taking screenshots, but there seems to be a bit of a different sort of color tone to DLSS 2 versus just DLAA. I can't quite tell. I think it might just be that the weather changed a bit while I was taking screenshots. The conclusion is DLAA wins out from pretty much anything else. It gives you the performance. I mean, we're getting, what, 110 FPS with DLAA and 140 with DLSS. So, I mean, if you're overall running a lower FPS, that's going to make a difference. But if you've got the power, you may as well just run DLAA. You get all the benefit of all the detail of DLSS, all the high resolution, internal resolution of ray tracing, and all the benefits of the deep learning algorithm. And I think possibly if the shading, like the shadowing, is tied to the resolution, then DLAA is also going to give you better shading. That could be why we're seeing slightly more detailed shading in these areas here with DLAA compared to DLSS. You can see even this bit in the dark, especially where there's less information. DLSS is going to have a difficult time reconstructing that image because there's just less image there. That's why you can see here the actual shape of that bit of the exhaust changes a little bit. A little less detailed, or quite a bit less detailed. Whereas with DLAA, a bit more detail in those darker areas. So before we go, let's just do one final check on that exhaust. This is the area where it's going to be the real test. So MSAA 8 versus DLAA in this area. Yeah, even MSAA handles this area better because it's just got more information to work with. But it's still a lot cleaner with DLAA because you're not getting this sort of stifling pattern. I'm hoping that CDPR actually finally release DLSS 3 to everybody for Cyberpunk, and I'm also hoping they add in DLAA as well, because then we can have DLAA along with DLSS 3 frame generation, and we can really get the maximum amount of detail out of that game. I'm also hoping for Portal RTX to be released soon because I really want to look at that, so keep an eye out for those videos. Thanks for watching. Please do leave a comment, let me know what you think of these different methods, if there's anything else I could test. Leave a like, subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.